begin tonight with an environmental mystery.
On top of
A large fish kill.
5,000 blackbirds.
Million of one particular species.
Now, I don't know if anyone is going to be watching this, but I do know that I can't move on with my life until this story is told.
Look how close we are to the water. It's right there.
On July 4th, 2009, a horrific ecological disaster swept through the eastern shore city of Claridge, Maryland, stemming from the local folk there polluting Chesapeake Bay with massive amounts of cow and chicken manure that were washed off into the waterfront with no end in sight since the 1970s. Staunch efforts by the EPA and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation had attempted to regulate and restore the bay to its prior state, but even these days, it shows no sign of clearing high levels of toxic contaminants, nitrogen, and dwindled oxygen. It's from this source that a sudden infection started spreading into the local town. No one knew of the polluted water being the reason for this small-scale pandemic, but what was known was people acting very weird and even winding up dead, with what was left behind as bizarre phenomena. The government sought to cover this all up so that the country, nay, the world, would never know what truly happened in the obliterated township in Maryland. Thanks to the efforts of one journalist, though, we may find exactly what happened to them. Boding well with what we are diving into, just don't dive into this particular bay, as today we are discussing the Bay, the Chesapeake Bay infection cover-up. News reports were abuzz. Millions of fish washed ashore dead. 5,000 blackbirds plummeted from the sky, dead. Worldwide, reports of birds and fish alike dying to unknown causes, sending a flurry of media coverage to the town. However, what was broadcast to the world as a mystery was in fact a giant conspiracy. What had happened needn't be known, as the harm it would do to corporate interests far outweighed public health and well-being. A catalyst and tragedy that spurred from the July 4th festivities in Claridge. What happened that fateful patriotic day in 2009 were all wiped clean. A college student majoring in communications by the name of Donna Thompson was one of the only survivors willing to speak up and reveal what happened that day, avoiding compensation from corporate interests and even risking retaliation to bring light to the truth over the span of 3 years since the incident. Speaking of her work interning for the news for the town population of 6,200 people that celebrated their coastal life with everything food related. Crab eating contests, crab walking, popular restaurants, a chicken industry, and being the spot for tourism to enjoy fishing and boating in the water, eventually leading to her having multiple interviews that she spoke highly of from the time with the town mayor, Stockman, who was what she claimed as culpable of the chain of events that was about to occur. Genuinely, this is not far off from current reality, as waste and runoff is extremely common in places like the Chesapeake Bay, which this is based on. 6 weeks prior to Independence Day, stories emerged of 2 oceanographers' bodies being discovered in the Chesapeake Bay with what could only be described as shark bite wounds. But the bite reports had been declared as from a bull shark, but they looked nothing like that. The flesh that was torn from them was in much smaller and more ravenous ways by smaller creatures. This comes after their extensive research had occurred into red algae buildup from all of the runoff of waste from the massive chicken plant nearby, polluting the water with no restriction. The 2 scientists had noted high mercury levels, polylactic acid, OPs, and PCBs, all way beyond legal limits that had been mandated over 20 years ago. Tons of pharmaceuticals and drugs were dumped into the bay, with all the toxins dumped in the water following a direct pathway that always led to the town of Claridge, as if the town's destructive, wasteful nature was going out into the ocean, but also returning to it, that it was all accumulating to become something hellacious. Some townsfolk tried to address this with the mayor and his blindly optimistic supporters, saying all the chicken shit being dumped by the tons into the water was killing aquatic life and harming the fishing industry. But anyone that spoke up would be quickly denounced with naysayers and eye rollers. If you didn't support the mayor, you were against progress. The mayor shifted the blame of environmental health to that of the EPA, saying it was their responsibility to keep the bay stay healthy, like an alcoholic blaming the doctor for not keeping their liver healthy despite drinking 3 six-packs a day. The reality of our world boils down to the sentiments of the politicians and the people just wanting to smile and wave as they say that families have grown up swimming in these waters with no concern. What's the big deal? We've been swimming in this for the last 50 years. That there is no cause for alarm over some environmental nut jobs morally grandstanding, all while investigations reveal that 45 million pounds of chicken feces was casually being dropped into the bay every year. No laws, no restrictions, no limits. Literal excavators had to be used to shovel all that chicken waste into the local drinking and fishing water. The bottom line here for a majority of folks and the politicians that Pied Pipered them in is, well, the economy, saying that Claridge must invest into making as much money as possible from their industries, most notably the chicken farming industry. Then and only then, when they have made that money, will they pay to clean up the bay. Progress meant the green in money, not in nature. The promise of cleaning up after money is always going to be a false goalpost. To ease the worries of those that wondered what high volumes of bird feces would do to their drinking water, local governance had a desalination plant instated to filtrate the water to ease public concern. But Mayor John Stockman's speech did not declare this as a win for the population's ability to drink, but a win to make poultry farming expand even more, meaning more money for them, meaning more chicken shit to dump in the water and more money for officials. It was just a cycle. They would simply laugh at anyone that did not want the desalination plant in lieu of polluting. Most of the general public were too wrapped up in their own lives trying to get by with their jobs and families. It was up to the government to ensure their health and safety and to make a stronger economy through chickens and summer tourism. And with that, some murky water that was going to be filtrated anyway, that was a worthy sacrifice. But as with those high levels of toxins seemingly returning to the bay after being carelessly thrust into the ocean, something was preparing to rear its ugly head. Early during the 4th of July ceremonies, a woman went into the crowd screaming in pain, hysterical over both her husband going missing and her skin being covered in visible bright red rashes and painful pustules. The event compounding extremely fast across most of the festival, a little girl having cysts and growths rapidly growing across her arms as she is driven out via ambulance. The crab eating contest has all of its contestants all begin to profusely vomit copious amounts of fluids. Before anyone could even react, a cursed affliction had already begun sweeping across the citizens of this small harbor town, creatively putting the reality of the situation to the oblivious public on full display by using the crab eating contest as the first large-scale signs of what could be a pandemic. Americans gorging on polluted meats to their heart's content. Over the course of that day, it was reported that one doctor had to treat over 350 patients that were rushed to the hospital from the festival alone. Each one would end up corpses by day's end. Patients would directly show horrific symptoms, growths that almost look like barnacles under a boat permeating across the skin, boils and cysts across people's chests, giant whelps on faces, all alarmingly growing unpredictably on any and every part of a person's body. The pain ramping up for infected individuals intensely enough where even the bones were feeling like they could snap at any moment. Doctors trying to pinpoint the source of what is assumed to be a bacterial outbreak, but with patients saying they have not gone near livestock or stayed out in the sun for too long, the answers would not be made so clear yet, even with outside opinions. On a routine route, one Officer Paul would drive up to the site of a collapsed white male on the side of the road. Other 911 calls would tell of a woman in a dazed and slightly frantic state walking around a yard drenched in red as she was vomiting tons of blood. When police would arrive at the scene, a concerned neighbor of hers would state that she was already dead, her guts ripped open, and more notably, her tongue all but gone, as if it was cut out. Some asked if this was just merely a domestic dispute. Friends of hers were bewildered. Donna Thompson, on the other hand, saw it as an opportunity to do field reporting, but thanks to her forcing herself to try and sound like how she built up news reporters to be in her head, her lines of questioning filming only served to deter civilians, blocking off what we would know about this particular situation. Footage of one child FaceTiming her friend showed her displaying these growths, acting very calm as she spoke over the cellular device, thinking she was abandoned by her parents, who apparently left the house in a hurry without a word to their daughter, facing horrible aches throughout her body with no family to look after her, alone as distant screams, police sirens, and more flood the horizon as more pustules develop on her arm, with only a young friend to talk to through a screen. This would be a shared reality for many people as they FaceTimed each other, attempting to find comfort and make sense of these biological nightmares. Dissecting more into what this may be, footage of the dead scientists reveals that they were inspecting fish from the Chesapeake Bay, finding multitudes of parasite larvae culminated in the stomachs of these fish, with no reasoning to where they may be coming from, especially in their appearance, nature, and numbers. It was a terrifying anomaly. They attempted to show this video proof and evidence to the mayor, but undoubtedly, he ignored their warnings. It was only affecting fish. It was nothing to worry about. Fish can't even think or feel. Surely cooking and gutting them will clear them of this parasitic influence. Flash forward to today, and the body count says otherwise. Although, even with everyone growing barnacle colonies on their bodies and people puking their guts out, the news focused purely on the death of the one woman, labeling her death as a murder at the hands of her own husband, saying that there was a history of marital abuse and that it was an open and shut case. News reporters were more concerned about Donna Thompson having the potential to launch her career but being unfit for the role, that she was not asking the right questions, so it was ruining this murder mystery debacle that could be the biggest story of the year for the town. Not about a looming threat of an infection. That was not story enough. Footage showed the accidental uncovering of one of the deceased with their stomach torn open and their jaw basically completely ripped off. The carnage was undeniable. People recoiled at the sight of these corpses, but more took it as the byproducts of an insane killer. The local hospital's Dr. Abrams spoke with CDC officials, showing the festering truth within the bodies of Claridge and its people. A cadaver's leg disgustingly eaten away below the knee, describing two types of parasites that are literally eating away at anything they can get to, gorging up through the leg to get to the main part of the body. What terrified the doctor in his verbal report to the Center for Disease Control was the finding that this was a parasite that ate its way into the body from the outside, not purely from a parasite being eaten within a food and taking up residence in the stomach like a tapeworm, but on the other side of it, there are parasites eating their way out of the body, creating lesions, boils, pustules, you name it, destroying giant chunks of flesh to give the image that they were bitten by larger creatures. Parasites eating their way through your body like a California burger joint. Once again, while people are begging for answers, panicking at home, at work, and in public, people dying and showing these nightmarish ailments, while police and medical officials are at a loss for words to explain anything that's going on, the mayor is taking radio station interviews, stating that he is quite busy with his re-election campaign and keeping July 4th festivities profitable, to not make a panic and keep the local economy moving. He informs the public to not be worried whatsoever, that with hot weather comes bacterial infections and digestive diseases. It comes with the territory in a coastal town. That everything going around about disease and death are just wild rumors, speculation, and nothing more. That the deaths are ongoing investigations that do not merit public panic. That these symptoms are just run-of-the-mill rashes we get typically each summer, downplaying every single thing in order to, in Mayor Stockman's own words, not scare one another with crazy and outlandish stories that serve no one's benefit. I want to emphasize that one word, benefit. Saying none of this hysteria has a benefit, boiling down to his core belief system, to not hurt the profit margins, to not grind the economy to a halt, that this way of thinking is the ultimate reason why this entire fiasco came to a fever pitch. The sight of mutilated corpses of men, women, and children having these lesions and boils beyond that of some simple shingle or hives infections or poison ivy or an allergic reaction to shellfish. This was all way beyond just murmurs. This was killing and infecting people at an alarming rate. This snowball would not simply just melt away via the local government's desperate attempts to brush this under the rug, telling people that once he can confirm that what is being portrayed isn't fake news, then and only then will aid be sent out. Yeah, this was from 2009 to 2012, long before civil discourse centered around that way of thinking like it has for the last 10 years. Regardless of what the mayor was force-feeding narratively, the bacteria had long been fed to the public, whether discreetly, by consumption, or via an ever more terrifying method. At the same time, a few miles away from Claridge, a group of friends were fishing off the coast when they discovered something none of them had seen before within the mouth of a bass that they had caught. During their confusion as to what they were looking at, an arthropod-like creature rushed out of the mouth of the aquatic life to crawl up and bite the man that was holding it before it scuttled back into the water. An unknown life form out there attacking people, and yet the general public were jumping to conclusions that were in different universes from what was actually plaguing them, blaming any and everything that was easily digestible for the public to satanic cults, Al-Qaeda, vaccines, flu shots, pesticides in our air and food, manufactured weather, biological warfare by Iran, global warming, etc., etc. Blanket statements masked as easy answers to give shape to an unknown threat that was thinly veiled right in front of everyone's faces. From the beginning, the scientists were having direct proof of schools of fish having their tongues removed, their bodies devoured as if bitten, and tissue being utterly destroyed, with no evidence pointing at fish going after one another, going against their own nature to commit these acts. So much so, in fact, that the oceanographers discovered that 40% of the bay's wildlife was just dead. Them eventually finding a fish with tons of parasitic isopods flooding the inside of its body. One even basically replacing the tongue of the fish to consume anything the fish ate instead. Akin to Cyomotha exigua, the tongue-eating louse, a pest that uses its front claws and specialized jaws to sever the blood vessels in the fish's tongue to cause it to atrophy and eventually fall off. The parasite then attaching itself to the remaining tongue stub, effectively becoming the fish's new functional tongue. The same rules apply here. The male oceanographer noted that isopods are among the world's oldest species, and they shouldn't be anywhere near this coastal region, and that they were behaving unlike any other parasite before, eating a host alive from the inside out without trying to keep it alive to feed off of it indefinitely. They were existing to eat without restriction and infest with no hesitation. Yet again, video documentation of these facts were forwarded to Mayor Stockman, and yet again, there was no official response. Medical professionals conferred over video calls about the stark increase in bacterial, not even infections, but attacks at this point. 30 cases of lesions, rot, and even anaphylactic shock in one report doubled to 60 in a very brief period of time. Tongues half or fully destroyed. Methicillin administration to halt bacterial growth showed no signs of treating or even slowing these signs of bacterial infection. Lesions are still spreading rapidly across patients' bodies. CDC officials calmly played it down as a possible fungal outbreak, citing one that happened in Vancouver that killed 30 people due to such outbreaks being so rare so far up north. While surprised, Dr. Abrams brought up one point of contention that separated this particular case. CDC inquiries into what Claridge was going through had them finding a news broadcast from 2 years ago in 2007 where a young man had died just from wading in shallow water with cuts on his exposed feet. Doctors had labeled his affliction as a case of Vibrio vulnificus, a flesh-eating bacterial infection. While these cases do spring up rarely across the United States, what happened to this boy was simply chalked up to Vibrio vulnificus. CDC officials brought up slides of wounds from the bacterial outbreak in Maryland, trying to compare that to the outbreak in Vancouver, noting significant symptoms like bruising in the skin around the corroded parts similar to the flesh-eating bacteria. But the wild symptom of tongue destruction is what had them scratching their heads. This was new territory for human subjects never before seen. CDC agents discussing how it's most likely a waterborne vector due to the depictions of lesions. One agent said it could be a newly formed and mutated variant of a fungal bacteria or even tapeworm, probably in part due to chemical agents introduced into the local water supply. Hospitals started noting infections jumping to other legs despite having already amputated the other leg on a person. When shit was hitting the fan with more questions than answers, that's when the CDC and EPA officials started interrogating Mayor Stockman. It was here the severity of the situation was fully unmasked. Stockman, finally, after ignoring quiet pleas from oceanographers, had to answer to two major government agencies, telling them that he had approved tons of agricultural runoff like chicken excrement was consistently and carelessly thrust into the Chesapeake Bay for years. However, this was not the catalyst for the isopods and parasites wreaking havoc. Back in 2002, an accidental nuclear reactor leak occurred near the bay. Not reporting this to either the CDC or EPA or any government agency, he says they expected the leak to not fully enter the bay until the estimated time of 2014, thinking they had time to fix this before it would get out instead of making a costly cleanup of it that may harm his political career. The estimations, however, were extremely far off when the nuclear leakage seeped into the ground and could have might have, in a way, perchance, gotten into the water 5 years earlier than expected. Immediately raising eyebrows to all parties listening in, one CDC agent asked if people had been drinking the water directly. The mayor denied this result and countered with a contradictory statement. He apparently had known all this time that the nuclear leakage had polluted local wells and even the desalination plant of which he used in campaigning to ensure safe drinking water to the townsfolk. But it was apparently all a facade so that poultry farming could expand, to shut up civilian naysayers so progress could make progress. And yet the very place designed to purify their water was in of itself polluted with radioactive material. And yet when confronted about this, the mayor says it still wasn't his job to test for radioactivity levels in the water, despite knowing of the leak for over 7 years, pushing for more chicken crap to be bulldozed into the bay, saying that, oh well, it's fine for some nuclear material to get into the water, as all of America has some kind of leakage getting into water that we drink in some form or fashion. Looking less like a leader in the video here and more like an annoyed teenager caught red-handed but brushing off their crime nonchalantly like it's their problem for treating it like a big deal. Blinking repeatedly, staring soullessly as CDC officials bring up that Claridge's infrastructure was barely above failing inspections, with their drinking water in that same category, getting a D-, selling a lie all this time, drinking snake oil in front of the unaware public, saying the water was the best tasting across the world. What happened since was on his and many others' non-existent conscience. 2 teenagers had gone missing before July 4th. A girl, Denise Richards, went to swim and was immediately attacked, with her friend going in after her to save her, only for them to both be swarmed by the isopods under the water. Blood splashing out of the murky depths, both to never be seen again. No bodies left behind, only a damaged camera to be discovered a month later. History repeating itself. No noise over their disappearance, only rumors, speculation, and eventually silence. These cases, like many others, erased or revised. A man had recorded himself reeling from the symptoms of the parasites within his body, his stomach pulsing like something was trying to burst out, the parasites writhing within his belly, devouring everything around them as he felt every bite. A 15-year-old girl was texting a friend saying that her stomach was feeling weird before she stopped communicating altogether. Hospital waiting rooms flooded with panicked people, covered in these red rash abnormalities, all writhing in pain, demanding to see a doctor. A woman was so consumed in agony that she began banging her head against the glass, trying to have some kind of sense or trying to distract herself from the pain. Things were getting so bad, people were having full body parts amputated to slow the bacteria and parasites. All of this while a mother tried to reach out to Stephanie Talmott, saying for her and her husband to not approach the city. The father had just had his leg amputated, and things across the township were only getting worse. Alex and Stephanie Talmott were a couple with a baby, coming to Claridge via private boat to visit her parents, as cellular towers were disabled during the ongoing crisis. The young couple and their baby had no idea of the chaos that was going on, but the mother had begged them to not get off their boat via a phone call, as the mother knew, with her legionary symptoms, that she, her husband, and many others were most definitely going to die that day. Sadly, Alex had already long submerged himself into the water earlier in the day when he was pushed into the water after failing to jokingly jump in with his girlfriend, just playing around. Soon, they would see premonitions of their future when an empty boat passed them by, devoid of any signs of life or even a skirmish. People seeing the bodies, the symptoms, the outbreak destroying the town. Those that weren't within hospitals waiting to see doctors were attempting to flee Claridge via vehicle via the only bridge out of town. And those that tried to escape were met with complete and total shutdown. There was no way to get across the bridge, never being disclosed, but some government agency or force had ordered for the bridge to be closed off for the next 72 hours, while the panic became worse in this city-wide incubation chamber. Donna's attempt to do field reporting at the abandoned July 4th pier celebrations would be cut short as she seized up at the sudden sound of screams echoing across the docks, faint, distant, and what Donna says in her own words, almost ghost-like. This wasn't an exploitable story to launch a career off of. These were people dying with no hope of help ever coming for them, the screams seemingly never ending. People being eaten alive from the inside out, but only as what sounded like specters in the distance. Officer Paul and his partner Jimson were seen responding to a distress call at 8:55 p.m. when his partner Jimson went in and multiple shots were fired. Audio recordings detailed how they experienced the worst of what this night was to entail. Multiple people were dying on the ground of this domicile. The shots we hear were mercy killings, followed by multiple of these parasites apparently either continuing to eat their corpses or pouring out from the shot bodies to hunt for more prey. One surviving victim in the family within the house approached the officers, speaking with no tongue, no way to talk to them except relaying frantic, bloody, garbled mutterings. The only words that would cut through this victim's mouth were, "Shoot me, shoot me." Killing the poor person as an act of mercy via Jimson's gun, Paul would be bitten by one of these parasites in the ensuing chaos. Fearing for his life, Jimson would shoot and kill Paul, fearing his friend would suffer the same fate as the people in this house soon enough. The bay was veritably an open grave. The Coast Guard, being called in to aid in the pandemic, would quickly remark how there were thousands, if not millions, of dead fish across the surface of the bay's water. The couple would head to the town's main street just to find bodies scattered about on benches all across the road. Apparently, people had been waiting for emergency services to arrive and pick them up, and didn't know where to go until succumbing to the parasites within. The couple take refuge in a nearby antique store while they attempt to find a landline. line. The mayor is soon picked up by the deputy sheriff as they both try and figure out where the rest of his unit is. No responses from anyone across any police force. Something incredibly telling during this one encounter between the mayor and sheriff is the sound of the car beeping at them, alerting him that the passenger side did not have their seat buckled in. The police officer informing him to put his seatbelt on, especially since he is riding around in a police vehicle. The mayor acting very agitated, having to do something so simple as to ensure his own safety. Even with the town's leading law enforcement there, he skirts laws intended for well-being, and the law just ignores it. They drive up to the site of Jim in his cruiser pulled over in the middle of the road. The officer, distraught, lesions already riddling his face. The parasites have already infected him, and he knows it. If this were isolated, one might assume he was infected with the rabies-like pathogen, causing him to be hostile to anyone that draws near. But Jimson knew he was going to die and didn't want anyone else to share his and everyone in that house's fate, telling them to leave without any explanation, just screaming to go, go, go. The sheriff deputy gets out to plead with him to leave with them to get to a hospital. This situation is completely different in each of these officers' minds. The sheriff is oblivious to how bad things have gotten across the town, telling him to go to the hospital and approaching this man, his fellow officer, in his infested state. Jimson, knowing he was dead to rights, having these little critters crawling through his flesh, and that basically anybody nearby will easily share that ill-gotten affliction. There was no answers to the monsters, no way to stop them. Only death was the way out. Jimson, not wanting his boss and friend to suffer at the claws of these crustacean abominations, shoots the deputy in the heart, killing him instantly before taking. Pain is powerful in its delivery and incredibly saddening to show the impact of how these events would realistically play out. This is too much for many to handle. The police were powerless against a force like this. In seconds, 2 men were dead. The culprit behind the machinations of their deaths could only stare in horror at what just occurred. Mayor John Stockman did not have blood on his hands, but on the streets of which he oversaw and neglected for so long. More and more bodies piled up in the streets. Alex and Stephanie Talmott reach a friend named Bill of theirs over video call when it dawns on the couple at the stroke of midnight that Alex was displaying symptoms of infestation with a giant whelp that has developed on his upper neck. His clock was ticking, as was Dr. Abrams, who was finally infected by the parasites infesting the hospital, alone within the building as emergency red lights flashed all across, creating a video log of himself to record his findings, that an organism had gotten into everyone's bodies in Claridge and killed them outright. Entire families were bloody and dead in the waiting rooms and halls. He was logging everything in the hopes that the world would know what happened here, despite the CDC, the EPA, FEMA, FBI, and more ignoring his calls for help all this time, wanting entire armies to be deployed here to wipe out these thousands of isopods before they break out further and take over the country. All the symptoms we had seen before were not infections of bacteria, but the parasites eating every organ they approach and causing the body to react accordingly on the outside. As he suffers from each symptom the parasites in his body were causing him to go through, he would record them for study for future researchers, turning himself into a living test subject, refusing to escape to make sure that people know what happens, until eventually his body would end up like one in the lobby, crawling with isopods with a fully eaten away jaw. Seeing all of these corpses only strengthened his resolve to chronicle it, but the sights of his soon-to-be state ate away at his psyche. On the subject of psyche, Mayor John Stockman, having no other options, commandeered the police cruiser and rushed through the streets at Claridge at max speed, seeing body after body after body after body. All people that cheerfully voted for him and put their full faith into him. Even one living person, covered in blood, tried to wave him down in the streets. But like everything in his political career, nay, his life, he ignored their pleas for help to ensure his own progress forward. And in that rushed state, much like with the chicken shit, nuclear leak, and desalination plant, he was ignoring the reality around him. At an intersection, another car T-boned him at full speed. Knocked unconscious, he would die from the injuries he suffered from the wreck. Karmic retribution imbued in a simple event, as it is stated that he could have been easily saved if any emergency services were alive and working. But his actions crippled communications, killed law enforcement, and isolated the town from the outside world that he swore to lead. Had he not just worked to help his people and not doom them to this travesty, but also he gets to get out easy to die in this way, to have the lights go out immediately and not suffer like his constituents for hours on end. An hour later, Alex's blemish would pulsate, causing him immense pain enough that he would vomit. His wife was only able to watch as an isopod burst through his neck, causing him to bleed out and die in seconds. Alex, earlier jumping into the bay at 5 p.m., caused one single larva to be swallowed whole, maneuvering into his right carotid artery and growing to an adult fast enough to eat through his neck. In the span of only 8 hours, it was able to do this. A husband, father, and friend, gone before knowing the fate of the town, but experiencing it all the same, leaving a mother and wife to wander Claridge alone with their baby in hand. It wasn't until it was all said and done that Homeland Security finally contacted the CDC, saying they did find the bodies of the oceanographers weeks ago, assuming they were killed by a bull shark attack. However, when they went to send this out as a shark attack alert to get people out of the water, forensics stated this was nothing close to a normal shark attack. So Homeland Security forwarded these findings and their bodies over to the Coast Guard for analysis. When the Coast Guard came up with the same results, the same thing happened, and they forwarded these results to FEMA for inspection. FEMA also drew nothing of relevance, so they drug their feet in sending this information over to the Center for Disease Control. The bodies of the oceanographers had been found for weeks, but due to bureaucracy, paperwork, and more, it was just now getting to the CDC. But the report had everything they needed to know. It fully detailed a multiplicity of parasites and what they are. It would have cleared the light on the confusion of a sudden epidemic. Hell, it could have prevented it, or at least had some precautions in place. It would have allowed safety measures and emergency services to be made for some kind of response. They saw that these isopods existed long before the Claridge attack, but nothing was being done. After all of Claridge was dead, minus a very few survivors, the CDC was finally given the information of the oceanographers and the parasites that killed them. But it was too little, too late. Homeland Security took 16 days to finally reach out to the CDC, knowing parasites ate through human bodies like bullets. And HS are just casually speaking about them like it's standard issue paperwork to be just filed away. Understandably, the CDC agent that oversaw this epidemic from the beginning to its end in less than 12 hours was furious at this development. HS saw this as a problem that could get them in trouble, that it would put them in deep doo-doo, and that because the incident occurred in a very small township, that this wasn't as big of a deal as the CDC agent was letting it on as. The HS agent in charge of security of the Homeland tells the agent of the Center for Disease Control that they both need to keep this little incident in perspective. To allow the shutdown of Claridge would mean all of the Chesapeake Bay would have to come to a close, becoming a domino effect of shutting down beaches, restaurants, vacation destinations, fishing and tourism spots, and more, to not cause a panic with the public over a disease that has not broken out, and there was no proof that it was contagious. It would drastically harm the economy to do so. It would cascade into the entire eastern seaboard being shut down and ruining trade routes, bringing up the devastation to the almighty dollar. The HS agent says this whole debacle would be a non-issue. It is a non-issue as long as they keep it under wraps. A non-issue for this ancient parasite that eats you alive from the inside out and reproduces like hellfire and grows in the span of just 8 hours. But since the issue was not brutally in our faces, it was pushed aside to ensure national holidays could maximize tourism and profit and keep trade perfectly flowing. Stephanie Talmott was attempting to find a way out when she discovered an abandoned working police car. Setting her baby up in the passenger seat and preparing to drive off, she is startled by a dying stowaway in the back seat, screaming, howling, blood gurgling through her throat, a missing jaw and tongue, the dying woman begging for help but to Stephanie, this was a zombie attacking them before she fell over on the console and died right then and there, with a single parasite peering out from the neck hole of the dead woman as Stephanie fled into the night, slowly, alone, scared, not knowing if her or her baby would live. The Claridge attack was officially over. Not a soul could speak. And for another 4 hours, only the wind would whisper a word. And the crawling legs of the isopods clicking on the hard ground of the city could only be heard. The sounds of flesh being eaten bite by tiny bite, and the squealing of thousands of mutant beings. CDC officials in hazmat suits would eventually arrive to round up the dead. The National Guard came in full force to quarantine the town, but more importantly to them, they scoured the town for every single recording device and camera and confiscated them. To kill off the parasites, government officials deployed thousands of pounds of chlorine into the Claridge Channel. That much poison being dumped into a water source would be alarming if not for the fact that 40% of the aquatic life there was already long dead, and those that would drink from this water source is in the same boat. This incident would quickly have the government swooping in to sanitize the whole situation. Much like the water, they went to clean their own names, offering untold amounts of money to any and all survivors of the Claridge incident in exchange for their complete and utter silence. After all, it was money that caused all of this, and it was money that would ensure that no one would ever hear about it again or going forward. Having suffered so much, people like Stephanie chose to remain silent, not just to take payday after her husband was dead, but also to not be hunted down by conspiracy theorists that think otherwise of the situation, government agents making sure none of this would get out, or to be hounded for information by interviewers and more. It was easier to be bought off than be hunted down, especially for a now single mother. Donna Thompson created this introspection of a mockumentary, due to the fact that the publicly released statement to the world was one of complete BS from the United States government, stating officially that it was just a bacterial outbreak caused by unseasonable warmth in the water of the Chesapeake Bay, and nothing more. People just drank a lot of bacteria and it killed them. But the miserable deaths, the ungodly isopods, the ignored warnings, everything, just the carnage in general, all erased and litigated to the story of one college student reporter. That too, would she be soon probably be sued by the federal government, hunted down by conspiracy theorists claiming fake news, and probably silenced much more, with this documentary being shelved and only chalked up to crazy theories. For those unaware, this video is a review of the movie The Bay. Following in line with my previous review and analysis of the mockumentary Savage Land, I wanted to discuss narrative significance in the story to real-world dilemmas and go over the story and analyze it and how the use of found footage in a documentary style made it so much more impendingly dark, gritty, and realistic. Many people in my Savage Land review assumed I was either reporting a cover-up or spewing fake news lies. I just like talking about good movies that get under your skin, and the title alone drew people in, and that's just the nature of the beast that is YouTube these days. Gotta chase the algorithms, but don't be a Facebook boomer, believe in the thumbnail for this video and commenting without reading or watching, and enjoy the subject of this movie that actually gets under your skin. Now, I do want to throw out that this originated as a real documentary style production centered around problems surrounding the actual Chesapeake Bay's issues of depleted oxygen levels from pollution due to heavy fish and aquatic life death tolls from it was actual chicken shit being shoved into the bay, and to this day it's gotten better, but it's going to take a while. Director and writer Barry Levinson decided to scrap the project of the original documentary when he discovered PBS's Frontline was already in the middle of making one of their own, cutting and repurposing his research and footage to create a horror-themed mockumentary, focusing on a found footage format to represent a modern-day Pompeii with people's recordings left behind to actually show what happened. Levinson also prided himself on this film's 80% factual information provided throughout the feature-length film. Dips of reality can make for more dreadful horror than those that big-budget production studios spend millions on to try and match, and that is what makes this film so eerily creepy and stand out from many others. It was genuinely what could possibly happen with how our modern day world operates to ensure profit margins hit their peaks at the cost of health and public well-being, even if political figures ensure otherwise. The fact that this was made in 2012 only goes to show how much its message has magnified in significance since then, ignoring symptoms environmentally, physically, and mentally across the planet and in certain areas to make sure no one is uncomfortable and in prime position to spend their hard-earned money. You gotta keep the money flowing. But not to sound like some disturbed teenager that watches The Dark Knight like it's the Ten Commandments, but we truly do live in a society